Hey y'all, welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Colton, here with Brandon. This is our second video in our Springfest preview series. Today we're talking about the matchups between the top decks in the meta. We just had our first set of results this weekend from Toronto, and we will talk about those as well. This is a little more stream of consciousness than normal for us, so the video may end up being a little bit longer, but it's going to be a little bit more of just like us kind of maybe batting some things back and forth as opposed to something a little more clinical like maybe you are more used to from us. But we think that because of the nature of this discussion, this might work out a little bit better in terms of both actually making the video and it might result in a better video long term. So we'll see. Let us know in the comments if this worked out and we'll adjust accordingly. So first things first, we should look at what we know from yesterday. We don't know what went 5 through 8 yet, but we do know top 4 from Toronto. Kaguya, the new stuff. Quints 8 standby. Escanor, that was team 1. Second place was AOT 8 Pants, Escanor, Coronet Marine. Third place was Quintuplets Exodia, where it spawns out a copy of all 5 of the girls from under the back row tutor, and they all have different abilities. That was on a team with AOT 8 Pants and a Kanata Marine. And then in fourth place, AOT 8 Salvage, Tokyo Revengers with both the dual laners and Pachin packages, and then another Kanata Marine. We did a video 2 weeks ago where we talked about the decks that we thought were going to do the best in Springfest. And we touched on, but did not go into detail about how you're going to run into all kinds of weird stuff at a Springfest because people are going to bring whatever it is that they want. The competitive season kind of feels over. A lot of people are, done trying to maybe grind out a meta and are instead wanting to just play the decks that they like. And you can see that in like the round by rounds that have been posted by some of the players. You've seen, a lot more stuff that would never have seen play at a singles event, but because it's trios, people are bringing that stuff, kind of out of the woodwork. And I think that maybe 8 months of meta grinding has like skewed the way that I look at a meta because I forget that that's what people do. Like I know it in the back of my head, but I forget that that's actually what people do. And I think that explains why some of the decks that we thought weren't going to be as good actually did quite well on Sunday. We're recording this on Monday. And primarily among them, AOT. 3 top 4s for Attack on Titan. We are pretty bearish on this set. Neither of us think that this set is top tier by any means. However, at the very first Springfest, it shows up in top 8 more than any other set. Brandon, what gives?
When we kind of looked at it, we looked at AOT as kind of like a good stuff deck, right? They have a bunch of different profiles that can be really helpful and really useful. With that in mind, one of the matchups that we didn't directly address was its matchup into things like SDS, specifically the Escanor build.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that in more detail because we are going to break down all the matchups like we do every season. So we'll get into the AOT SDS matchup and why specifically that may favor Attack on Titan, especially the Salvage and Choice builds. But I think to your point, the other thing that we were kind of harsh on the good stuff's deck archetype 2 weeks ago. If you're playing in a meta that is varied from top tier meta all the way to someone running Milky Holmes because it's funny, a good stuff deck is going to win a whole lot of matchups in Swiss. It may not do as well once you get into like the last couple of rounds or into top 8. That might be some of what happened here. But when it gets to play a bunch of different stuff, when you throw a million different looks at it, because it has just so many good, competent cards in it, it's resilient enough to win a lot of matchups that maybe you did not see coming, didn't specifically prepare for. Based on this last weekend, and again, like we could be just overreacting in the other direction, that's always a possibility, but I think based off of this, I'm willing to tweak my expectations of AOT to be, if it is like your third lane, or even your second lane, it is competent in enough matchups where it will win you enough games to get you into top 8. It has that capacity. I think that's the best way to read this.
I also think some of it too might also be with pricing too, right? I think some of these things are a lot cheaper too. Just
Well, Springfest is a good event for new players too. I think that also helps. Like you're gonna, if you've got if you and your friend are trying to teach your third friend how to play, or you and your friend are, you're the guys that you play with all the time, but you need a third for Springfest, you kind of drag somebody along and hand them a good stuff deck. It's like, okay, AOT, it's very straightforward. You combo, you try to get this card and this card, you play these cards, and then you just combo off and try to win. You know what I mean? Like it's straightforward, and that's just not to trying very hard not to make it sound like AOT is like an easy deck or whatever. That's not the point. The point is it is straightforward enough that like if you're a new player or if you get it handed to you by some friends who are on maybe something a little bit more meta relevant, you're gonna do fine because it just works. It's a competent, consistent deck that does enough good things, and that's where like if you're going to step back and look at the whole Springfest meta, like what we've been doing for the last 8 months is narrowing in at like the top third of the meta, right? And when that is your spectrum, when that is what you're looking at, decks that are very good and very competent and perfectly capable just don't look as strong when you're looking at them only compared to the quintuplets and the SDSs of the world. And I think that maybe is a bit of what was happening with AOT, at least from my perspective, like the way I was perceiving AOT coming into this weekend. So, yeah, AOT, definitely competent, definitely capable, has plenty of good matchups, and is resilient enough to deal with the weird ones. That's probably the big takeaway, I think, for AOT. And that's notwithstanding the rest of this top four that we haven't even touched on yet. The winning team is no surprise. 8 standby Quints, Escanor, and then competent deck in lane 3. That's literally, to a T, what we expect. I expect most of these tournaments, especially in the first couple of months, to be won and, topped mostly by teams that look something like this. And then beyond that, I think, Tokyo Revengers is another deck that's a lot like AOT. It like doesn't maybe do as well into those super tough matchups, but it is good enough to do well in Swiss. So I think you're going to maybe see a little bit more of that in top 8 than we initially had discussed. You're going to see weird stuff in top 8, right? Like Haruhi got a top at an event last spring. Like, you're going to see weird stuff in top 8. It's just going to happen. Exodia is also an interesting choice. Like we had talked about how we didn't really expect anybody to be on any quintuplets other than 8 standby, because why would you play something other than 8 standby in your only quint slot? But then Exodia takes 3rd place. Springfest is very much just an expect the unexpected kind of event across the board.
This is editor Brandon coming in a little bit later. Avis from Weiss Tea Time was able to update the 5th through 8th place. These were available after our recording. I want to throw them together so that way we have all of them together in our one spot and before diving into our breakdown between the matchups. For 5th place, we had MTI and Quints at both on 8 standby alongside a slime with a pants book. 8 standby Quints yet again with AOT, the salvage choice top end, and Hololive Kanata Marine. Escanor build alongside Kanata Marine and AOT salvage choice. Rounding it off, Hololive with Kanata Marine, MTI 8 standby, Quints 8 standby. A lot more board-based, a lot more of the decks that we were kind of expecting to see from these results. A lot of Hololive, a lot of Quints.
All right, let's get into it. We have isolated 6 decks that we want to talk about in the context of Springfest. This is the stuff that we expect on the teams that are going to win more than the other stuff. These are obviously not the only relevant decks. We talked about other decks in that video 2 weeks ago. Go check that out. These are the 6 that we expect to be most relevant. Quintuplets, AOT, Hololive, Sword Art, SDS, and Slime. In terms of win rate, in terms of top rate, in terms of chance to actually win the event, these are the 6 that we've kind of decided are probably at that top level for the course of the entire Springfest. Obviously, there's other relevant stuff, but these are the ones that we think are probably most relevant at this juncture looking into the spring season. We're going to start by going through all of the matchups for quintuplets. Quintuplets versus AOT. Quints will win board a lot against AOT. Like I think that's like that's where this matchup really like crystallizes is AOT is going to have a hard time beating Quints on board. Like even if AOT like loops its pants combo, right? Or loops its salvage combo, the 2/2s cross turn are still sitting big enough that AOT is going to have, it's going to be in like a power tie situation. Or you might actually still be under depending on, what kind of back row support is on board for the Quints player. So what does the Attack on Titan player do here? Like this is a matchup we saw plenty at Worlds, and Standby swept the board 6-0 over 3 different AOT lists. What can the AOT player do to mitigate that advantage?
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's an uphill battle for AOT in that matchup, right? Because you're going in against cards that can effectively recur themselves through Encore, and you're struggling to play into that a little bit more. There are cards like the Connie that can try to deny people using Encore, but even then you're only looking at a single lane, and Quince is able to kind of recover from losing a single lane relatively quickly.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think that the Connie is decent. It can do some stuff against it, but there isn't a whole lot else here other than just, the early plays themselves. But, they only get up to 13. They can be beaten cross turn. This is a tough fight for AOT. Next, Quints versus Hololive. Specifically, we're going to try to talk about Kanata Marine, although we may touch on some X Marine stuff as well. This was a pretty even matchup at Worlds. I don't think much has changed. Like, I don't think there's anything that's different about this matchup. It's a 50-50 matchup. These are both decks that want to get big on board. If you're the Quints player, you want to try to keep them from doing Kanata multiple times if you can help it. Like, they get one turn of Kanata, but beyond that, like, this matchup's pretty straightforward. It hasn't changed in 8 months, aside from like the Neg Soul potentially never seen play again.
I think it's pretty well back and forth at this point too, because I think both players know this deck, see this deck, played into this deck enough times. Like especially going in from last season into this season, this is just a carryover from last season. You're playing it the exact same way. You're playing it the same exact matchup as you were before.
Yep. So we'll see how that plays out. Neither of these top ends are extremely explosive. We're going to talk more about explosive top ends. We will get there because there's some stuff we have to talk about in regards to that. But yeah, I think this is definitely more of a board-based matchup than a lot of the other ones. It's a little bit more, I don't want to say retro because it feels like a game from 2 years ago in a lot of ways. Where you're like trying to get big on board and trying to win board on defense a little bit more, but especially if you're the Hololive player. Moving on, Quints versus the new Alice list from Sword Art. And if you're looking at this, by the way, if you're looking at any of this and you're wondering, what does that deck do? We talked about what all these decks do 2 weeks ago in the kind of the deck by deck overview of all the relevant stuff. So check that out if you're wondering, like, what does the new Alice do? I haven't seen this yet. We'll talk about that more there. This is going to be an interesting matchup. Alice really wants to get to level 1 first because Alice's advantage is predicated on looping that 2-1 combo. Or at the very least, if not looping it, plussing off the 2-1 by keeping it on field cross turn. It's going to sit at 10-5 or 11, depending on how many Brainstormers you have in the back row. That is a hard number for anything to get over at level 1, even a standby deck like Quintuplets, right? At most, Quints is going to have like 1-1s on board at that point if Sword Art gets to 1 first. So if Sword Art gets to, if Sword Art gets to sit at 1-2 and do all of its things and build its whole board full of Alice's, even if the Quints player has 2 1-1s in the back row that they can then just push up, those are not big enough. At least not without some help. They can get a 2-2 down and then combo it to stand it up and then swing really big with it. And that swings at 13-5. And if, Sword Art is still at level 1, then it's probably not going to matter much. Sword Art does play like the level 1 memory kick, but I think that only goes up to 2k.
Yeah, so it only sits at max without 13, so it's not going to be big enough to get over or defend against the 2-2 coming in on that turn. So Quints is basically given a lane to be able to step over at 1, which I think is going to be pretty impactful, especially if AOT stays at 1. AOT, if Sword Art stays at 1. So I think that kind of back and forth there, especially in that early to mid game, I think it's going to be pretty impactful. I think it's going to be pretty decisive as to how that game plays out. But I think where that really comes into play is with the top ends of those decks, because of the potential explosive top ends that Sword has for this deck. The Silica does have some pretty good instances of where it can be really, really explosive and really, really helpful. It also swings for smaller numbers, so it has potential to stick more of those damages, and has shuffle back too, right? So it has like some of those key things that we like to see on combos, as well as a little bit cheaper than the Argo. But I think the Argo is also a little bit more explosive, and I think that's going to be important in matchups like this one, where you might want to be able to close out your opponent from just outside of 2.
I think we're reaching the point in the meta right now where, like, it used to be that everyone wanted to heal, right? You're like, the best thing that your card could do was heal you down to 3-0. You're more likely to live. We're living in a world now where pretty much everything has at least 50-50 odds to close you from 3-0. Like, you can't bank on living from 3-0 anymore. Once you're into level 3, you just have to go, unless you can keep your opponent out of level 3, right? So it's like that, like, healing is broke, cantripping is woke, because you get a card, and that's way more valuable when you're trying to close the game. But bespoke is just doing more damage.
I can't believe you just did that.
Argo doesn't cantrip, Argo doesn't heal, Argo doesn't care. Argo wants blood. And I have so much respect for it. It just tries to swing for stupid numbers. Just going to swing over and over and over again. You will die. Argo is convinced you will die. And there are a lot of games where you will die because Argo is legitimately super good. I like it a ton. So I think that the future is, like, right now we're in a world where, like, cantripping is better than healing. We're moving fast into a world where extra damage is going to be even better than cantripping. Especially because now more and more we're seeing decks that have other ways to get you your climaxes. So climaxes are becoming more consistent. It's easier than ever to have your level 3 CX in hand. You whiff it in fewer and fewer games. That extra bit of damage makes all the difference. And I think that that's what we're going to see with this Argo. It's super powerful. I like it a lot.
I mean, we've always seen that the more instances of damage, the better. And I think that we're seeing this combo with this top end really helps to solidify that. So I think in that matchup then between Sword Art and quintuplets, being able to potentially close out quintuplets back ways gives a lot of support to SAO. On the flip side, quintuplets being able to bring down the combo early to potentially do the combo twice is also pretty impactful. So, like, I think having those explosive top ends at the top really make this matchup much more 50-50, because you're able to essentially extend yourself in either way on either side of the table.
And I think, and I want to go back to the mid game just for a second, and like that going to 1 first thing. If Quints gets to 1 first, and they suddenly, like, bring down, like, they have a 2-2 in the front row because they comboed, and maybe they even triggered again and they have a second one down in their back row. Like, Alice can combo once, but so much of Sword Art's advantage engine is based around keeping Alice on board that if Quints gets to combo again, or if Quints, because they're going to just hand encore that 2-2, they don't care if they lose it to the first Alice. Alice is only going to combo once, because it is not necessarily easy to bring the Alice back all the way around, right? So, that being the case, your Alice becomes a lot more like just a regular level 1 combo. Because you're paying 1 to get it on board, you're stocking, which is fine, you're paying back your stock, and then you're just plussing 1 off of the combo. So, your extra plus, the thing that gives you the advantage that makes the Alice super good, is keeping it on board. So if you have an answer, or if you're the Sword Art player and you allow your opponent to have the answer by pushing them into 1 first, especially Quints, then you're going to lose out on a lot of advantage. Sword Art really wants to keep Alice alive. And if Quints gets to one first, Quints can deny that Alice a lot more effectively. It can remove at least two of them, if not all three, make it really difficult for Alice to recur. Next, we want to talk about Quints versus SDS. Saw this matchup a ton at Worlds. It was very even. Standby won in the semifinals against SDS twice. I think the general consensus is that 8 Standby still holds the advantage in this matchup, but not by much.
It especially in those matchups, it could have gone either way, kind of thing. Like it's a very, very close matchup. It's very, very close between the two, I think. I really like that top end with Escanor to be able to actually like close out games. And I think it has a really high average of doing that, right? So being aware of that, I think you really need to especially make sure you're trying to close them out from before they can get to that point. So it's just trying to smother their resources because you're going to be bigger than them, right? For Quints, you're going to be bigger than the Escanor build. You're going to be big. You're going to try to maintain that advantage to burn out the resources. So that way, when you get towards the end game, you can just kind of turn around and close, hopefully from outside of 3.
Or at the very least, like, you can bring down your combo relatively early. And if you're sitting at 2-2 and you push them into level 3, then you're a little bit less scared. So it's weird. Like, it's like a 2-turn endgame that starts in the middle of 2. Is kind of like what Quints wants to do in this matchup, I think. If it can get ahead in the damage race. And that's also another thing, right? Like, because Quints can win board, and I think it will, because SDS, like, as much as I think that Meliodas level 1 stuff is actually, like, pretty solid, it only is, 6-5 with no help. And, like, there's not a ton of extra power, like, defensively in this list. Like, there's nothing that really grants extra power on defense. So they're sitting at 6-5.
Back up to 8-5 at best, yeah.
Yeah, like, you can get over that pretty easily, even with your 1-1s, if you're Quints. And SDS just doesn't have, like, the SDS does not have a consistent way to get over the 2-2s coming back the other way. The 2-2s are sitting at 7 or 8. And, like, Meliodas can get to 7-5 with combo, but, like, that's, again, super easy to back up if you're the Quints player. And you'll take that, right? Instead of ditching one to save your character, you play the backup. You're losing the same cost from hand, and you're not only removing one of your opponent's pieces, but you're also getting an extra soul to swing. You could push more damage. So, like, either the play is to get way ahead of them in damage by doing that, winning board and swinging in with your extra triggers, or you hold them out, which you can also do if you're Quints. You don't have to push damage, right? Because you're literally a standby deck. So, like, there's no obligation to push damage on a standby deck. And you just leave them at 2-4, But the challenge, of course, being that Quints doesn't really have the explosive top end themselves. Like, Quints isn't going to stick a whole lot of, Quints isn't going to stick 10 a whole lot. That's just not what it's built to do. So I think maybe the play here for the Quints player is to win board, push that extra damage early, and push SDS. If you can get a level ahead of SDS and survive an Escanor from deep in level 2, then you're in a pretty good position to close. But of course, if you're SDS, you're just kind of, you're just hanging out. You don't really care. Like, SDS is not here to play levels 0, 1, and 2. It does not care. It has a couple of early plays, right? Like, those are those interesting things that it does until level 3. And then level 3, Escanor rolls in and just tries to kill everything. So, and it's also pretty easy to push that damage because you have the guild that just bounces things. You're gonna get your stuff. So SDS is pretty consistent at that. But yeah, no, I think this is an even matchup for that reason. Like you're walking on eggshells a little bit with 8 standby in this matchup because you don't want to creep too close down to level 3 and then just get yeeted by Escanor. You got to be careful. Next, quintuplets versus Slime. Slime won this matchup 3-2 at Worlds. You're the Slime player, Brandon. You tell me, like, who's favored and why?
I think Quints is a little bit more favored only because they're going to be bigger on board. Slime can play to the memory compression, play the game of, hey, I'm going to try to cancel more often. But it's not going to be winning board very often. And even if it was bringing out its early plays to play those down, those aren't going to be winning board either. So, like, you're playing the heal game, you're playing the compression game. So you're trying to stall out as long as possible to kind of deal the death of 1,000 cuts, essentially, against Quints.
Yeah, until you get to level 3 and then the book combo swings for 3-4, 3-4, 3-4. Which it does. Like, it does very consistently because it's cheap.
Yep. It's a free top end, and it searches itself on play. So, like, you only need one combo in hand to get the rest of it in play and go. So, it's a very solitaire matchup in a sense. And a lot of it's going to depend on the Slime player managing their deck state most efficiently and effectively. That's really what it's going to come down to. And Quints being able to push extra damage early at 2, I think, is also a pretty big factor as well.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. This matchup in particular, where you know you're not going to win board, you really just lean into, we're going to send as many cards to memory as we can. We're going to get our healers into hand, and we're going to heal down. We're going to survive. Because again, because quintuplets doesn't have like this super dynamic top end, healing down to 3-0, if you're Slime, isn't so bad. You're trying to heal down to 2-2 over and over again, right? Like, you're hoping that Quints deals 2 and you can heal one of them off. And you hope that you get to do that 2 or 3 turns in a row so that you can build the resources and push, Quints, like you said, death by 1,000 cuts, push them just close enough so that then you can snipe them out with the Shizu top end. So let's step into the rest of the AOT matchups real quick. And AOT versus Hololive. They didn't meet a ton at Worlds. Kanata Marine split a pair with Salvage Choice. I think this might be one of those matchups where I think this might be like the threshold matchup for AOT, right? Like we talked about how like it's kind of on the outside looking in when it comes to the top of the meta, but it's competent enough to beat basically everything that's below it in the tier list pretty consistently. This is like right on the edge, I think. This is where Kanata Marine is really, really consistent at what it does. And it's big enough on board that it's going to give AOT enough board problems. This reads really even to me.
I think it is really even. AOT really kind of has the advantage going into level 2, but I think Kanata at level 2 all of a sudden takes over almost instantaneously.
As Kanata does.
I think the one thing going for AOT, though, is that with the Armin in play, you have a bit more defensive counter to the tap counter.
Yeah.
So, like, you can kind of play around that a little bit more efficiently.
Yeah. And that's specifically something that the Salvage Choice list has that the Pants list does not have, is that the Armin package that at level 2 can spawn out a 3-2 back row that itself has hexproof and grants hexproof to whatever's in front of it. And because tap counter is one of Hololive's, best defensive pieces, it basically just takes it out of the game entirely.
On the flip side, the Pants package has a bit more explosive top end potential that could close out Kanata before Kanata gets all the way into level 3.
And the thing with Marine is that, like, Marine isn't a super explosive top end. It's just super cheap and efficient. It's so easy to triple it. And, if your opponent is decompressed at all, it will close with some consistency. But the Pants top end, like you said, the Titan top end in AOT has the potential because it is the thing with it is you don't have a ton of deck control in AOT. You have a little bit. You aren't necessarily going to get yourself into a position where your burn is exactly what you want. You could get yourself into a position where the burn is going to be generically in the ballpark of what you want. Like you want that to burn for 2 or 3. And I think in most games you're going to be able to do that. AOT and Sword Art. the Alice is going to cause so many problems for Attack on Titan. I think this might be AOT's worst matchup. I don't want to say it's a nightmare matchup because that's a big word, but man,
I think it's going to run into the same problems that I ran into with Quints, that it gets big early and it's hard to have an answer to that. So Sword Art's going to be able to potentially double combo, and that's going to give it a lot of advantage going forward.
like Sword Art can have 3 10-5s down at 1-0. And I just don't think there's a single thing in any Attack on Titan list that can deal with that. AOT opening against Sword Art is like, shoot, this is not the matchup you want at all. Like your level 1 combo, it only gets up to 7. You don't have like a ton of back row power going on. There's no way to get to 10.
Even if you bring out the Armin changer into the 3-2 Armin,
your level 1 combo is still too small.
At 2.
Yeah.
Yes, your level 1 combo is still too small. And if you bring out the early play, unless you have additional power pump to the early play itself, the early play would also be in counter range.
Yeah, this is hard. Like, your best bet is, in a shocking turn event, you really want to get to 1 first. And you have 4 copies of the Levi Ricky. So like that helps. You can rush yourself into 1 and get your combo turn off before Alice happens. But then like from there it's just like you are never winning board again.
Yeah, I think at that point you try to play the more damage rush essentially.
Yeah, like, and you're on pants, right? So you can slam at least, or you might be on pants. And if you're on pants, you can slam the pants. If you're not on pants, you can slam the salvage. Like, but pants, you obviously pop back into your hand. I think pants is a little bit better positioned to deal with this just because it can play the damage rush game because it's getting CXs into hand for free all the time. But man, this is tough. And I also think that Sword Art's top end is more explosive.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, this is tough. This is a really tough matchup. There's no way around it. This is a really hard matchup for AOT. I don't know how AOT beats Sword Art with any kind of consistency. Like, you really just need to push damage. Hopefully you force them into a bad refresh point. And I think that that's really your only game plan. I don't really see any other options.
Well, the Armin is also able to deny the anti-change counter that they typically run. So like you're able to kind of deny some of that. You're able to deny money counter if they run a money counter. Again, hexproof again can deny the death gun if they're running death gun, so you're not going to lose power that way. Like you have some tools in your arsenal to actually use, and you could even potentially win defensively because Alice is not as strong offensively as it is defensively because of the counters. So like you could try to play a little bit more defensively in the mid game, but you're also kind of like backpedaling at that point.
I haven't seen an AOT list that's very heavily into counters.
Yeah, the lists I've seen have typically have a memory kick and a free fresh counter. So like you can usually potentially win a lane. You could also potentially win offensively with a lane running the changer and the back row support because the changer can give power to a single lane. So you could actually step over a single lane.
If you're in yellow, you do have, especially if you're running the salvage level 1, you do have the new mobility gear. So like you can at least, if you win a lane, you can like keep that card at least or something.
Yeah, just to try to help save resources. Yeah, no, like you can, but you're also at that point trying to recycle like a single lane. So it's like the advantage is still, I think, in SAO's favor there.
Oh, strongly, yeah. This is a massive advantage for SAO. I think this is maybe the most definitively lopsided matchup that we've looked at so far. AOT into SDS. This one is definitely in SDS's favor, I think. It did go 3-2 against AOT at Worlds. The top end is just more explosive and all that stuff that we've already talked about. But we were talking about this a little earlier. There is a play that the AOT player can make to potentially turn this into a positive matchup.
Yeah, potentially having the double Armin back row can deny the bounce, so that way they can't swing for as much damage with the Escanors. And it also opens them up to potentially getting that memory kick off, which could also then turn off the combo entirely.
Yeah. Like that requires a lot of sculpting. You're almost abandoning your own top end because you're playing super heavily into, your early plays and your arm and stuff and sculpting into the memory kick very specifically. But I think you're right. I think that's a way that you can play around it. And at the very least, like, even if you can't memory kick them, at the very least you are forcing them to swing for, you know, they're swinging for 1 9 times as opposed to swinging for 1 14 times. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
You are forcing them to play a fair game at the top, and you also can, even if you don't have it in the deck, the Escanor player has to know you have access in your set and your colors if you're in yellow to the memory kick counter, which can, as you said, shut off the entire Escanor combo. So, like, you have to be super careful if you're the Escanor player. You're walking on eggshells in that matchup a little bit if they have that board down. This is basically locked out for Pants, though, because in order for Pants to use its trait stuff, the traits on the Armin package are just all wrong. So you don't really have access to that very effectively in the 8 Pants list.
Well, the 8 pantsless, you're playing a different route, right? You're trying to get that top end burn off before they do, essentially. So you're kind of racing to 3.
I think Escanor is a more consistent top end. The Pants in AOT is, it's good. I think it's very good. But it's hard to triple, right? Against 8 Pants specifically, SDS definitely has the advantage. Against Salvage Choice, it's a lot closer, and it may actually, like, if the AOT player really plays into that Armin package, it could end up being a matchup that's favorable to AOT.
I think it's still pretty favorable towards SDS, but I think that there are at least some outs that AOT has that at least have some potential lines of play there. With that in mind, I think it's still relatively close. With that in mind, I think there's some tools you can do for that. I think that you can also play into some things pretty well.
So AOT into Slime, what is the Slime player trying to do when they see AOT come down on the board? Like, does anything change, or are you just going to continue to play that solitaire game we talked about?
Essentially, you play the solitaire game. Your early plays are going to get beat out in power, so like you're not super worried about that. I think you play for the heal, you play for the memory, you play for the explosive top end of the top.
And I think that if you're AOT, 8 Pants is going to do better into Slime because of that explosive top end, because the hexproof doesn't really matter, right? The armament package doesn't matter a ton against Slime. So trying to make the Sasha top end work, which is super expensive and doesn't, it gets extra attacks, but it doesn't have any real consistent burns. It can Icy Tail, or it has a very expensive, burn 4 that it can try to pull off with some of its other pieces. Like, it's got some stuff, but I don't think it's as consistent of a top end as the Pants for sure. And that means that Pants is in a better position potentially to actually close in that matchup. Hololive into Sword Art. This is an interesting one because they're very, very similar. If we're talking about Kanata Marine and Alice, right? Alice will win board at 1. Kanata Marine will then turn around to win board at 2. And I think the difference here might be that just Sword Art's top end is more explosive.
I think Sword Art establishing board 1 is pretty important. It puts Kanata more on the defensive. And because it puts Kanata more on the defensive, it allows it to essentially control the game from there. I think then because of that, it also having an explosive top end really helps to favor that matchup.
And I think the other thing with that is Kanata, as much as we talk about how, kind of comes down at 2 and it's big, it's not big enough to just beat the Alice outright. On its combo turn, it's swinging at 12-5 or something. It has, some back row help. But it's not swinging super big. That's definitely within counter range for Alice.
At that point, Alice has been setting up prior to it, so it can already grab in the counters to hand, so it'll have the counters in hand ready to go to defend against it. It can defend with the memory kick counter, so it can remove it from field.
It can defend with memory kick counter. It can also defend with anti-change counter, right? So like if it double combos, which we expect it should be able to.
Well, yeah, and you can even grab it off the single combo, right? Because you grab 3 cards.
Right, but what I'm saying is like because it's plus so much, right? Like because it's going to plus on board because it's not going to die. It's going to plus an additional time for each lane because you know if you can loop the combo. So this Alice has gone +6, +9 because you're stocking as well. So like if you can keep that Alice on board, like that is such a massive, massive, massive plus. So it has all the stock, all the cards it could possibly want. It can anti-change. So like if you're if you're the Kanata player and you finally get to level 2 and you're finally able to get your stuff down, you swing immediately. One of your things got powered over, the other one got yeeted away, and then the other one gets memory kicked. Like that's a very real world you might be living in.
Well, and I think realistically, Kanata's going to win the race to 2, right? Because Kanata's goal is to get to 2 first. So Kanata's going to hit 2 while Sword Art's still at 1. So it won't necessarily have access to the anti-change immediately.
That's true.
But it'll have access to the memory kick immediately.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, Kanata's already, I think, defensively trying to deal with a board that can beat it, even at its big state.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it has to deal with SAO essentially comboing again on the backswing.
And all those resources also make it just that much easier to double the Argo, because the Argo is ditch 2, so like you need a full hand to really use the Argo, but like okay, like that's actually doable. Like in some games you might high roll into a triple Argo, which is just terrifying. Like the possibility of that is actually quite real. So yeah, I think that this is a matchup that the Sword Art player, like at level I think at all 3 levels Sword Art can win this. Like at levels 1, 2, and 3, Sword Art can win this board and develop more resources and push more damage. Like this has the potential to be a really positive matchup for Sword Art if it can make the most of those opportunities. Hololive into SDS, it did not go well for Hololive. 0-5 for Kanata Marin into SDS at Worlds. Like what do you do if you're Hololive going into SDS? Like I think that this is the challenge with Hololive, is that it's only got a 50-50 matchup against Quints. It's got a losing matchup against SAO, and I think it's got a losing matchup here against SDS too. Like Kanata Marin, it could really struggle.
Yeah, so I'm suspecting we're probably not going to see as much Kanata Marin because of it.
Yeah, especially once Sword Art comes out.
Yeah, especially when Sword Art comes out.
It can at least win board, right? Unlike the Sword Art matchup, it's winning board at least until level 2, and it's even probably winning board through level 2. Like you want to double your Kanata. You want to Kanata 2 turns in a row if you can. And you want to use that, you want to compress to stock, compress to hand, so that maybe the Escanor is not as good.
Yeah, your goal is to heal down as much as possible, and so like trying to play into that as much as you possibly can, I think, is the play. It's just a matter of being able to recur it.
It's doing the same thing that Quints is doing. It wants to push SDS into level 3 while it's still chilling out at 2-1-2-2, so that when Escanor comes down, Escanor, it pushes you into 3. It still deals its 9-10 damage or whatever, but it's not enough to close the game, and then you can just Marine. But clearly at Worlds, like 0-5 speaks volumes. That was very lopsided. So like it's clearly an advantageous matchup for SDS, again, who's just doing the same thing they do in the Quints matchup, just kind of hanging out and just trying to do what they can on board, but they're more concerned about just making sure they have everything they need to pop off at 3.
Well, realistically, they probably actually win board at 1. Like, so having turns where your cards can actually live cross turn is actually going to be pretty meaningful for that matchup too, because then they're not taking as much damage on the backswing. Pretty big thing for SDS, because they're not typically getting those plussing, especially from all the other matchups we talked about so far. Like this is being one that they can is actually important, I think, to actually recognize too.
Yeah, but I will say this, that Hololife's saving grace, both here and against SAO, is going to be that tap counter.
SDS's defense is to bounce, right? So you're bouncing a character swing with the other one. So you could potentially swing into it and try to tap the last swing. You could, but if they've already stuck 6 off the first swing, depending on how far out you are, yeah, it could be a little more difficult and a little more tricky.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, this is not a great matchup by any means. This also, like, realistically, if you're Hololive, you, because you can, like, you're rushing yourself to 2, you're getting your stuff down, and you're gonna, like, the Kanatas are going to win board cross turn. You're gonna do the same thing you were doing into Sword Art, where you're gonna build as much resource as you can, so that you can, you know, so that you compress down through stock and into hand, and just be ready for whatever you can. But you're also, and again, gonna just have to get ahead by a level, so that Escanor doesn't just kill you. Like, at least the Argo you can tap down, but like you said, if Escanor is able to bounce 2 lanes, which is not unrealistic, and that's another reason why you might actually want to rush it, so it doesn't have the stock to bounce 2 lanes, so that it actually has to play, it actually has to swing into a real lane with one of its combos. So at the very least, you can tap down the off lane. Yeah, this is a tough matchup. Like, again, this is a tough matchup based on what I'm seeing from people who who are playing Hololive right now, who played Hololive this weekend. Like, it's not, there's some rough matchups for Hololive right now.
But that being said, Hololive still can do really well.
Yeah, it got 3 tops, like 2 Kanata Marines and 1 Karne Marine. Clearly, it can do something, right? Like, it's a lot like AOT in that way. It's very, very good against everything that's below it. I want to hear from some Hololive players who are still on Kanata Marine of how they're going to play into the SAO SDS matchups. I want to hear from them. We're speculating, right? We're talking about this, but like, I want to hear, there are people out there who are still very staunchly on this, and they feel probably pretty justified in that after 3 tops, 3 top 4s on Sunday. So I want to hear from them, like, how are you preparing for these 2 matchups specifically? Hololive into Slime. This is a weird one. Is Kanata big enough at 2 to give Slime's healers trouble, or is that, like, not even the thing that matters here? Or is this yet another solitaire game for Slime?
Slime does what Slime does. What's important to note is Slime can actually win board in some places at 1, which I think is important with combo that it can step over the 6/5 Clock on Core Miko.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty important, because then that can help lessen some of that early damage. Play that heal stall game against it a little bit more. You're able to stock a little bit more. You're able to get the resources you need. So that way you can do a little more explosive at the top finisher. You can play a little stronger mid game. You're going to be smaller than Kanata, but you're going to be able to, which also means that Kanata is not going to be able to effectively recur its combo. Like, it's not going to be able to heal multiple times by playing it down. Sure, it's going to be able to get the cards it needs into hand, but it's not going to be able to heal.
I think it kind of points to how neither of these decks, like, they both obviously have capable top ends, but neither of them have the kind of top end that's going to close you from 2/4, 2/5. So the healing down is going to matter a lot more, I think, here between Marine and Shizu. Because, like, Shizu swings for big numbers, but, like, it's not expecting to stick 3 of those 6 swings. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, Shizu's hope is that, she finds a 3 and a 4 and wins the game. So I think that Slime, because it has better compression, can maybe deal with Marine better than Hololive can deal with Shizu.
Well, I think the one thing that Hololive has going for it is the tap counter, right? So you can potentially shut off a single lane if they're going to front into you. So, like, you have to play around that.
Yeah, and I think in reference to that tap counter, like, if Kanata can continuously win board at 2, as you were talking about, then if it can double Kanata, it can get the resources necessary to both prepare for Marine and also have the 4 extra cards it needs. All right, home stretch, Sword Art versus SDS. First 1 to 3 wins. I think that's it. I think that's everything. We can just move right on.
I mean, as much as you joke, yeah, pretty much. Well, except the problem is SDS has a hard time dealing with Alice.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. This is another one of those things where, like, Sword Art looks at that level 1 board and goes, "Ooh, I can beat that. I can beat that. That's juicy. I can beat that."
And then looks at the level 2 board and says, "Oh, I could beat that too."
I know, right? Like SDS is literally only scary because of its top end. The rest of the deck is aggressively mediocre in so many ways. Like not to be mean to anyone's favorite deck, but man, there's not a whole lot going for SDS until that top end. Like that top end is so explosive and powerful, but the rest of the deck is so okay.
You're slamming climaxes and going is what you're doing with Escanor, and realistically, Sword Art wants to do the same, but it also wants to get that combo off, and realistically, those Alices are going to plus.
Oh yeah, the Alices are going to plus a lot, and because, and again, same thing with the Kanata, right? Because it can win board, it will stock clean. If you can triple Alice 2 times in a row, like if you're 8 out of 20, Escanor suddenly doesn't close nearly as effectively when almost every other card in your deck is a climax. Like, not saying that that's necessarily a super viable plan all the time, but like, you can get yourself into a position where maybe Escanor doesn't immediately kill you.
SDS actually has stock swap access, so like you can actually with that, but at the same time, being able to maximize that oppressiveness early shifts this to SAO's favor.
The thing here with SAO that is most interesting to me is that it doesn't feel like it has like this necessarily like dynamically outsized matchup against a lot of stuff other than, AOT and other like level 1 good stuff decks. But it does have the edge against a lot of other really good stuff. Like it has an edge, and I think like the good players who are on SAO are going to be able to exploit that edge. You want to get to 3 first. Like whoever you are in this matchup, you want to get to 3 first so that you can send out your super powerful top end to try to kill your opponent before they can send out their super powerful top end. Like, as much as that's the joke, that is also kind of true. SAO versus Slime. This is a weird one. Like, I know I said this last time with the Hololive matchup, but this is also kind of a weird one. Because, again, Sword Art will plus so aggressively at 1 because it can just bully Shizu on board. However, when we get to the end of the game, the Argo is least effective against things that are super well compressed. And Slime, if Slime is sitting there 8 out of 20, does Argo close?
It definitely is gonna try.
It's gonna try.
I think that that's going to be the big difference maker, right? If Slime can kind of keep up the heal, keep up the compression, keep up the damage canceling early, then it's going to be a pretty straightforward game regarding like staying alive and then burning. The SAO player on the other flip side, one trying to get Slime into that range and then just closing before Slime has a chance to do the backswing. So if SAO can get it to in about 2-5, 2-6, Slime's not going to be able to cancel that much.
Well, I think the other thing with the Argo that we haven't really talked about, and this is like the one thing that kind of keeps the Argo in check a little bit, is that it can more or less whiff its Musashis, right? If it's swinging into something that's compressed. But so if your burn 3 cancels and you Musashi for 1 and then you swing for 3 and that cancels, you just got 1 damage out of that whole lane. And if you do that, like any deck, half the deck is going to be zeros and climaxes, right? So you got about a 50% shot in most Sword Art lists. And, obviously it changes based on, what's in stock and all that. And, Alice can mess with that to a certain extent. It can try to get whiffs out of the deck. But, like, even then, you still have a pretty sizable chance of, burning for 1 a couple of times in there if you're on the Argo. And as much as I like the Argo, that little bit of inconsistency will definitely cost it some games against compressed stuff. The numbers indicate that it closes about half the time when you double Argo plus, with the Musashi, when you're swinging into 8 out of 25. And those are like easy numbers for Slime to get to, right? Slime's going to get to those numbers pretty consistently. But that's also assuming the average roll, right? Like the average, and if you roll below average at all, that number just drops considerably. There's a massive difference between Musashi for 1 and Musashi for 3. And like that little bit of variance, I think, could really cost Sword Art in matchups where, compression matters. Something to keep an eye on. I think it's a pretty even matchup all told, because like Slime is just going to eat less damage off the Argo. And then I think it can turn around and close. Like if Argo is at 3 and Shizu's at 2-4, and Argo pushes Shizu to 3-6, Shizu's going to win the game pretty often. Because it's not like Sword Art compresses that well, you know? And like you said, it's super easy to triple the Shizu because if you have one, you can just go get the rest of them. Yeah, all told, I think that's a relatively even matchup.
I think it favors SAO because SAO can kind of loop that level 1 game pretty effectively because Shizu's not going to be able to touch that. Or, yeah, the level 1 Shizu's not going to be able to touch that. So you're going to get multiple turns with Alice, and I think that that's a pretty huge advantage. So I think it favors SAO here, but I think that Slime at least has an out.
Yeah, and the compression game also has its own low roll chances. You know, like if you're 4 out of 10, right? If you're 4 out of 10, like the odds that you eat 3 are still, you know, they're not 0.
The odds that all 4 climaxes are on bottom of the deck are also pretty high.
The slime player, everybody. All right, moving on. Final matchup: SDS versus Slime. Same song, second verse, honestly. Except I think that Slime's never going to loop its combo because ideally its combo's going to memory, right? So like, but I think that Slime, if it can at least slam CXs, can do something. SDS is going to try to hold at 6-5 cross turn with those Meliodases.
And Slime can hit 7 with combo, yeah.
Yeah, post combo, right? So like, let's say that, you know, Slime gets there first and then SDS beats over it. Like post combo, Slime is pretty small at 1 after combo because its combo pieces have gone to memory. At least that's the hope if you're the Slime player. But you still have some pieces that can handle 6-5, or at the very least can handle a couple of 6-5s. Like it's not going to dominate board in the mid game the way Alice does.
You also have the early play, right? So Shizu does go to memory on the cross turn. Have the early play Shizus that come down on field. So you have early plays that can step over SDS's mid game.
Yeah, if you get pushed into 2, yeah.
And even then, when you get to push into 2, you try to heal down, right? So you try to heal down. So even when they get to 3, that they can't close you with the Escanor turn, so you turn around and close. So yeah, very similar to the game that's playing with Alice with that regard.
But I would say that into this matchup, SDS has an advantage that Sword Art doesn't, and that's the swinging for 1 over and over again.
Yes. It can close a little bit more with the essentially the burn 1s.
If you're 4 out of 10 and you're Slime and you're facing Argo, you're going to live. If you're 4 out of 10 on Slime and you're at 3-0 and you're facing Escanor, you're not going to live. Like Escanor is going to, you know, if Escanor can double bounce and can just swing in those open lanes, then it's going to find the 6 cards that are clean in those 10, and then you get the refresh point and that's game. So like the compression game is definitely much less effective against Escanor.
Yes, which is why you have to play for the mid. You have to play pretty hard in the mid game for that early play heal, and heal down. So that way, when Escanor goes down, because Escanor will come down, it's a matter of being able to survive the Escanor turn and closing in the following turn.
Yeah, it's this weird thing where like if you don't have an explosive top end, you are trying to push Escanor into 3 as quickly as possible while staying a level ahead in damage, so that the Escanor doesn't kill you. But if you have an explosive top end, if you're on like Argo, for example, you want to get to 3 first because you believe that you can just kill SDS. It's very interesting. It's very interesting how the way you play into SDS depends heavily on what your top end can do. And that's assuming that we're on Argo. Like that, like there are so many other things you can do with Sword Art. Like shoot, like there's the Kirito top end, like the Silica that we've mentioned, like the Alice is still a deck that exists, like the Xenon is around as well. Like there are things you can do in Sword Art that are not Argo that are also, you know, at least capable. So, you know, just depends. And I think that's everything. We talked about all 6 of the, I think, most relevant decks coming up for Springfest and their matchups with the rest of them. Hopefully this was good and useful. Hopefully you can use this in your prep for your upcoming Springfest. We will be back on Thursday with 5 cards, 5 minutes, and then next Tuesday I will have a deck tech talking about the power-up sets, Log Horizon, and Haruhi. Then we'll have gameplay for that the following Thursday, and a new Clock Talk in 2 weeks. We're going to be talking about what happens in California. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and have a good one.
We'll see you then.